Today we got part 3 of swing archetypes, and part 1 was the upper body, part 2 was the lower body, and today in part 3, Terry's going to put it all together and make it all clear, crystal clear, and come to be. All right, so I'd like to introduce Terry, who I'm sure you all already know him, Director of Instruction at Hudson National in New York, um, a Sportsbox technical advisor, and a very prolific user of Sportsbox AI. So Terry, I'll pass it over to you.
Well, thank you, Phil. Prolific user, as my friend Mike Adams says, technology is a better set of eyes. So I'm always trying to educate my eyes better. And as long as I'm surprised by the results, then I'm going to keep using technology. So it's great to be here. Thank you. This is part 3. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that we have discussed in the previous 2 webinars. The first part was talking about the upper body and, how the sort of the trail arm or arm folding test and the unique sort of characteristics of a human's sort of ability to move affects the shape and type of swing that they have, and how that then affects some of the numbers that we'll see on Sportsbox. We talked quite a lot about sway gap, and let me just show some examples of some swings, maybe to start us off. Someone like Rory, for example. Some of the numbers I'm going to be looking at just to sort of look back on, the upper body, things like sway gap. These numbers are here from last week. I don't use my iPad all that much, so I can swipe up and check out what other numbers I want to see. So sway, we can talk about, let's see what we got here. Sway gap, for example. Let's see, save. So for example, when Rory is setting up for his driver, we can see he has a relatively small sway gap. We were talking about the way that the upper body moves, which I'll come on to. We can see, that different types of people orient themselves differently. They have different grips. So we can see here Rory's elbows are pointed away from each other, not tucked into his rib cage. I mean, the arms are tight, but the orientation of the elbows is away from each other. We can see that he has it's a little bit pale, but the slightly stronger left hand, slightly weaker right hand orientation, which would be one of the variables that we look at. And now, of course, with Sportsbox, we can both see the numbers and also, look closely using the video. When he gets to the top of the swing, he's increased his sway gap slightly, but it's still a very small sway gap. So we also know that, Rory tends to, drop and lift a lot, which is probably seminar 2, but that would be one of the most important characteristics of, more of what we call the profile 1, 2, 3 type of swing. If I go to, what else we got here? That's a good one. Let's see who we got here. Someone like Charles Howell, for example. It's going to take a second. So Charles Howell, if we zoom in there, we can see that he's got a little bit stronger trail hand. His trail elbow is pointed more down towards his trail hip, and he's going to have a little bit bigger sway gap at address. So he would be more what we call an under golfer. That means that he is, profile. Let's see what we got here. So a little bit bigger, not huge. As he gets to the top of the backswing, pretty much keeps it. So he kind of keeps his tilt, is what some people might say, and increases his tilt through the ball. So those are sort of, the initial things I was looking at in terms of, the first seminar. Let's see what else we got here. There's all the swings I try and use but don't work. Tommy Fleet was a beautiful example of profile 789, which is more of an undergolfer. And again, if you don't understand some of these terms, and I lay it all out in the first seminar, but just a sort of quick review. This is Tommy hitting an iron, so you can see at address his sway gap is 1.7, gets to the top 1.5, so pretty much keeps a similar sway gap. So it's very common and really good players, in my opinion. As they come through transition, I'm going to talk about this for some of the videos I've made. We can see that he actually reduces his sway gap slightly before increasing it through impact. So some of the stuff we talked about was, how do golfers set their sway gaps? Somebody who's more of an on-top golfer is going to have, someone like Rory is going to stand closer to the ball and have more angle in his wrists at address. somebody like, so you see I've got the different swings saved under different styles. Who else we got here? Someone like Xander, who's obviously doing so well, stands a little bit further from it. But most importantly here, his handle is a little bit higher. So these are some of the matchups that we'll see between the different variables. You can see with this driver, he's a lot further from the ball. The handle's above his belt buckle. So some of the things that we're going to see in these sort of upper body profiles are, related to setup, some of the movement characteristics. When Mike and I assess somebody, and I encourage you to go back to the first one to see. Can you see me, Phil? Sorry.
No, not at the moment.
I've got to put my video back on. Sorry. So when we're looking at how do we define the profile, one of the variables was, if somebody swings their arms, if they take the golf posture and swing their arms, the trail elbow pulls in and there's very low wrist rotation. That's what we would call an on top golfer. They tend to have their hands lower. Their grip is oriented more on top of the club, so likely to be, slightly stronger left, weaker right. They're going to have the hands lower. They're going to have less swing gap, etc. Somebody who's an under golfer, when they swing their arms in their golf posture, they're going to get a lot more wrist rotation, but a lot less translation of the elbows. So they stand further from the ball, and they tend to have more swing gap. So that's sort of a very quick overview. When we looked at the second seminar, it was much more about how do we assess and assign sort of the criteria for the lower body action. If you think of the hips like gate posts, some people turn around the right gate post. When we do an assessment, we just ask people to take the golf posture and turn. Some people turn around the left gate post, and some people go backwards and forwards. So, equally. So they're what we would call a center post. So you have a rear post. Somebody tends to shift more to the right for a longer period of time, turns around the trail hip more. Front post golfer is going to turn more around their lead hip in the assessment, and they're going to tend to go to their front leg much earlier, someone like Bryson DeChambeau. So let me show just a couple of those. And these are all different golfers I've looked at. It's been such an incredible resource, Phil, because you know how hard it was to get data in the old days. Nowadays, if you have a really good quality image of somebody, video of somebody, which is still, of course, stabilized on a tripod and what have you, we can really get under the hood data for everybody. So we can see here some of the numbers we look at in the lower body. I was especially looking at sway, lift, and rotation in the golfer. So we can see with Cantley, first of all, I'm going to look at his sway to the right. So he maxes out somewhere around halfway back. He keeps going, actually, I beg your pardon. So he's maxing out a little bit later in his backswing. Now the key here is he's dropping down, so we can see the pelvis lift dropping. So he goes down to somewhere around 2.6, 2.7 down, and then lifts through impact. We can also see he has a decent amount of turn. I wouldn't say it's a big turn on the way back. And, sort of around impact, he's, I would say, medium to maybe slightly higher. So some of the things I would look at with lower body action would be that. Let's see who else we can see here. Let's look at our friend and partner, Bryson, who's a very different example. Bryson is a little bit overexposed, but that's okay. So this is Bryson hitting probably about 180 yards. Oh no, it's 9. That's interesting. It must be around a 302 iron or something. It's going to take a second. So what we're going to see with Bryson is that he is what we would call a front post golfer. So with 9 profiles, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Front post would be 1, 4, or 7. And so we saw yesterday that Hideki Matsuyama won, and he is a front post golfer. He's somebody that naturally goes to the front foot earlier. So when we watch Bryson move back, so let's look at his pelvis sway, for example. We can see that he moves a little bit to the trail side, and then very early in his swing, he's already moving back to his lead side. So we can see, as the club starts to change direction, he's already 1 inch closer to the target than where he started in the backswing. So that'd be an example of low body. His lift he's down, what is it, 1.8. So you wouldn't say that he is obviously Cantlay is not quite as fast a player as Bryson, but Cantlay had more drop, so he's more of what we call a center post golfer who tend to have more drop and lift. Bryson is a little lower on the drop lift scale, but obviously we understand that he is extremely strong and pushing into his lead leg for a long period of time. So let me see. So that's just sort of a quick look at some of the data that we can see. So, so today, putting it together, when we think about it, I was thinking really, it's like, how do we give a golf lesson? How do we make decisions? I think, along with my partner, Mike Adams, we ask ourselves that question, like, how do other teachers make these kind of decisions? How do people decide? So Mike has developed some tests and some assessments that we do, and that gives us a really good indication of how people move. I think the important thing that we emphasize is, what can this person do? And so the two tests that I showed earlier really gives a great indication of how both the upper body and lower body move. It gives us a really good indication of things such as sway gap, for example, which is the upper body relative to the lower body, sway, which is more absolute, moving to the trail side. So what time in their swing do they stop moving to the trail side and start moving to the lead side? How much does this type of golfer drop and lift? Is this golfer going to be somebody that rotates more or less? So within the different profiles, as I touched on in the previous segments, for example, profile 2, 5, and 8, which would include players like Rory McIlroy, Tiger Woods, and Xander Schauffele, they're going to tend to go down and up more. So if we remember what people used to say about Tiger Woods, for example, was that he, his fatal flaw is that he went down and up. It turns out that the fact that his lower body was lowering and lifting actually obviously took his upper body with it. And that was really just him loading into the ground so he could push into the ground. But that's a characteristic which is much more closely aligned with those profiles. Profiles 1, 4, and 7, which I talked about earlier, people that tend to get onto the left side earlier, that have slightly less rotation going back and through, as will players like Ludwig Aberd or Jordan Spieth or someone like Minwoo Lee. They tend to be moving more to the trail side. So it's kind of an interesting reverse U in that either side of the middle, people tend to rotate slightly less and go down and up slightly less. In the middle, they tend to be rotating. It's kind of a hybrid swing and dropping and lifting. So like I said, I covered that in the first section. Now, the reason I covered it now is to say, well, that seems like some interesting variables, and how do we decide which person to teach it to? And, how do we decide what each person should do? And so that's why I think, the assessments that Mike has developed, and subsequently the work that we have done together, using motion capture, sports box, ground reaction forces, launch monitors, is downstream of the type of movement that the person presents with. We then make decisions based on what we will teach. And that sort of comes to the first point I want to make today is, how do we teach this? How do we put it together? Well, I always look at coaching like layers and say, well, if somebody has a quote unquote swing fault, then technically they should hit the same bad shot every single time. Because I don't know, let's say their club face is closed, 15 degrees at address. And, if they just swing their swing, as it were, they are going to hit it, very left every single time. So that would be, effectively like a first layer problem. The problem is, as golfers, when we learn to play, we don't exactly know what one fault is or a one layer problem is. We know that we don't want to hit it to the left. And some kind of combination of, instruction, Instagram is very powerful these days. And the game itself is also a big teacher. Hitting out of bounds on the left side is a big embarrassment. So the layers of teaching are very interesting. Like, how do we implement this? Well, we have to find out, before they add all these layers in, where should we start? Like, how should this person swing look? Should they be somebody that is moving a lot side to side, or a small amount side to side? Or should they be staying more centered and dropping and rotating more? Should they be behind the ball? Should they be covering the ball? Should they have a deep hand path? Should they have a more upright hand path? So these are all, really important questions. And if you understand, and hopefully look further into what we do, we have we start before all of the noise. Like we start with the person. What can this person do? What do their assessments tell us about what we can see, for example, here in Sportsbox? So we know that if you're, somebody whose elbows fold in on both sides, you're going to be profile 1 to 3, and you're going to have a relatively low sway gap. You're going to stand pretty close to the ball. Your hands are going to be more on top of the club. Your hands are going to be a little lower. When you look at Sportsbox, the sway gap is going to stay relatively low all the way through the swing. The hand path is going to be deeper. Jack Nicklaus was a good example, and somebody that, as his hands got deeper, so that it's more like a hands in, club up sort of swing. So, his quote of, keeping the club between his elbows was kind of genius. What that means is if you keep the club between your elbows, this elbow has to get deeper. So some people need more of a flying elbow. The people that are rotating the hand more under in the backswing, their hand path is going to go more up, but their head is, or the shaft is going to be flatter, but the head is going to go under their hand path. And so these kind of decisions are really important, and the things that we have to decide each day. The lesson that I'm making here is to say that, how do we implement all this information? Well, firstly, we have to start with, who are you? And, maybe why do you do what you do? But the main point I want to make here is, how do we make a decision? I'm not entirely sure how different teachers make their decisions. We make a decision by deciding how it is most easy or effective or natural or whatever you want to call it. Like, that person can do certain movement patterns and finds it very hard to do other movement patterns. So we start there. So that's the first thing is, we start before all of the swing stuff, before all of the technology, we start, so who's this person? So then we move forward and we actually build it out. So obviously we understand the presenting problem is whatever, they have a two-way miss, they miss hit it sometimes, they block some, hook others. But the problem is it's very hard to move backwards from a two-way miss and roll it inside, cross the line, drop it under, lay under. It's much easier to move forward from what can this person do, because their hand-eye coordination and their perception of golf is much more effective from the place where they understand their own movement pattern, they match their own movement pattern. So, putting this all together, it's much more of like a philosophy of, how do we approach coaching? So once we're able to work out how they move, then it's very important to try to fix their presenting problem, whatever that might be, hook, push, whatever series of shots they might hit, by fixing the first layer first. Like, fix their bad shot and not the reactions to their bad shot. And that's very important to understand that, if somebody comes in and they have the club face 15 degrees closed, they tend to hit hooks, but at the same time, they haven't hit hook for the last 2 weeks, then, they're obviously overloaded on the blocking their club face impact sort of situation. So how do we apply it? We say, well, how do people move? What bucket do they fit in? So their profile is some combination of the way their upper body moves, and like I said before, the way their lower body moves. And, let's say their profile, well, I call it profile 4 because Hideki won yesterday. And, they'll tend to move to their lead side pretty early. And, if they then go to a coach, or maybe even if they look at some of the average numbers, they might be inclined to make a change. So we have to be careful that we start off by creating a series of numbers for that person that are suited to them. And so that's basically how Mike and I approach using Sportsbox. And once we're able to match them up, which very much starts with setup, making sure that their distance to the ball, handle height, grip orientation, shaft lean, and things like this are in line, then we can start to move forward and build it back into something which is built out of the first layer where they were pulling it, and not out of the third layer where they're pulling it and then they started to push it and they didn't like pushing it, so then they hang back, stop their body, and started hooking it kind of back on the target line. That becomes very inconsistent. So it's much more effective if we can start at the beginning and build it out. That's why that's the most effective way that we find to teach. And so we're going to be looking at the assessment and then the numbers that match their assessment in Sportsbox, and trying to work out what's the easiest sort of low-hanging fruit at that point. So that's sort of my philosophy. Secondly, I would say, in terms of how do we apply it, like what sequence do we teach in is a very important thing. Almost always, we will take care of the grip first, make sure that the the way they hold the club allows them to move, and then according to their nature, like I said, distance from ball, things like this. Once we can have the arms and hands moving freely, I'm not going to show it to you today, but there's this thing called homunculus man. We improve the person's hand-eye coordination. So if we match up their natural movement pattern to the way they hold the club, the distance they stand for a ball, things like this, it becomes an awful lot easier for them to make good contact. And remembering that obviously we connect to the club through our hands. If we're able to fix the way the hands work, the arms work, the shoulders work first, and then move into improving their lower body action, that's for us a very logical way to do it, because we can get people hitting the ball extremely solidly, more consistently, very early. So respecting how the human body works, we need good hand-eye coordination. Some of the things that people say when we see really good players, especially in short games, is, wow, that guy's really good hands. Or if we look at people that play golf for a really long period of time, they tend to have good hands. It's not to say it's the only thing that's happening, but taking the hands out or starting to fix somebody's golf swing stuff from the lower body up is pretty hard, because it's really distant from the way in which we deliver the club. So club delivery first, lower body action second, and then blend it all together. So I made some videos. So if anybody has any questions, I'm going to play a series of videos here, which I made earlier in the week, to talk about how there's some drills to fix sway gap at setup, or through transition, or through impact, and also talked about the lower body action. So if anybody has any questions, I'll answer those right now before I go into some videos. Bill, you still there? Anybody?
Yes, I'm here, and I haven't seen any. If you've got questions, put them in the Q&A, and I'll address them as they come up. But to get started, I do have a question. You, by chance, have the opening screen that you had with the 1, 2, 3, 4 arranged in a matrix? Do you have that handy? Pull it up.
1, 2, 3, 4 in the matrix.
One,
I
2, 3,
don't know.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The matrix that had.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find it here. I'm not sure if I got it. Well, I have it. I'm just not exactly sure where to find it.
That's okay. I mean, we can just talk about it. One of the things that I just realized, and I may be a little slow sometimes, but basically it's a matrix, and the rows represent the grip, and the columns represent the post. So is that correct?
Yeah, I would say let's not call it grip, because a grip is a sub part, let's say, of the way that the arms fold, and this is obviously something that you and I need to talk further about. So when we do the assessment, it's really how do the arms fold? Like, do the elbows move in and out like this? Do they retract, or do the elbows sort of fold and supinate and pronate? So that's more the origin of the movements, and then the setup stuff is to accommodate that. So people who tend to pronate and supinate more, they do better with their hands slightly more under, so we call it under, which facilitates that rotation. If you put your hands over and you're trying to rotate, then it starts to block the motion, right? And so the grip is a matchup to the movement characteristics of that person. So so grip is part of it, but it's not necessarily a grip test. It is a movement test, and the movement, downstream of the movement, we talk more about sort of hand path, head path, grip, distance to the ball, things like that. So there's a few things which are second to the assessment.
Yeah, but just to simplify, in my mind, if you were to kind of think of it as like the X across and the Y down, you'd have your 3 post positions, which would be rear, center, and front.
That's correct.
Then, of course, you'd have your grip, which is on top, side, and under. Or have you now classified that as the elbow motion or the arm motion?
Well, no, I'm just trying to explain that the assessments are, posting style and a folding style. And then, if you fold and your hand's on top, then you are more of an on top golfer. And if you fold it under, you're more of an under golfer. So it's more a question of, now, of course, the grip is going to be slightly more on top or more under or whatever, but it's a better way to think of it as being a box that includes a bunch of other things, not just the grip, because the grip is fine. Let's say, for example, I would like my hand to match my folding style, and my hand does this.
Mhm.
you know, but at the same time, I start with my elbow like this. You know, even if I grip it under, it's probably not going to work. And so there's a lot of things in the box which include, you know, elbow position, sway gap, grip. So those are all tools which facilitate a freedom of motion relative to what our motion style can do.
And it's
So grip
okay.
is a big part of it, though.
And it's okay to be in any one of those 9 boxes as long as it kind of matches what you did in your assessment to start.
That's exactly right. And so the we build these matchups around the the movement that people kind of can do. What we come across is a lot of people who are slightly more on the extremes. There's people who have been extremely successful moving 2 inches at the top of the backswing to the trail side, and they've been told to be more centered and lost their game a little bit. There's people that tend to go front early, to the lead side early, and they've also been told to move more to the center. So a lot of coaching will tend to move everything to the middle, and for us, it's just really, to be a successful player and coach, you need to understand which bucket am I in, and therefore which of these ever decreasing items can I improve. So obviously grip is a really big deal. Elbow position, sway gap, distance level. There's all these like things that as you tick off these boxes, it becomes a lot easier for you to move more freely. And if you think of people when they play really well, what does it feel like when you play well? Well, it feels pretty free. I don't really think about that much because their body is lined up in a way that they could play offense and not defense.
Yeah, and so if you're mismatched, then you're probably going to be playing defense, and so you'll be more inconsistent. You can play that way, but it'd be harder to be consistent.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the more pressure, the more it sort of shows it up.
Things fall apart under more pressure or when you're tired. Okay, we got a couple of questions here. Two from the same gentleman, Gabriel Lagoris. Thank you, Terry, for an amazing series. Specific question. How do you deal with someone who is an undergolfer, folding type, with a torso backswing and shoulder downswing, where the trail grip is a side cover matchup or is trail grip? Does that make sense? Did I read it again?
Well, I'll just answer it. It's a general answer, to be honest with you. There's really, it's just a lot easier if you like I say, you tick off the boxes. Grip is extremely influential because when you grip it your way, it generally tends to line up the joints a little bit better. Like some of the videos I'll play now will kind of show how to do that. But if you line up your joints, the sway gap, the elbow position, the hand position, they tend to sort of flow together. And then obviously as a coach, you need to watch out that you're not missing a piece. But I think that was a complicated question, so maybe I didn't explain myself very well.
And then
My
he
fault.
followed up with a second, or is trail grip variable or second to arm folding pattern?
No, they're the same. So we really closely match up our grips and folding styles. Very important. And it's very unusual if you look on the different tours that grips and folding styles are significantly different. And if they are, there's usually a cost of distance and what have you. But yeah, so it's or in Bryson's case, for example, I mean, we would say that Bryson has a relatively weak trail hand, so on top, but he also has a weak lead hand. But he's built a system around drawing it, and what we'll find is that people who tend to have a weaker lead hand will tend to draw it more often than fade it, because of the way it facilitates more of the supination. So he's put an awful lot of work in to do that, and he understands how to manage it. And then you have Colin Morikawa is an interesting one who has he has a more of an under folding style. His trail elbow starts down, doesn't go very deep, and hits spades. So from a very low handle position, which is slightly more unusual for a under golfer. It's hard to get your hands under the shaft if their hands are low and you're very close. So consequently, him and Jon Rahm, when he stands close, and it's sort of a variable for John. When he won the US Open, he wasn't quite as close, but they'll tend to hit cuts from there. So there's sort of there's matchups, and then there's intended outcomes, and how limiting is that, in terms of what all possible outcomes. But if you're, somebody that is mostly matched up, but you have one or two variables that tend to tilt your swing direction, and you know that, consciously or not, and you just play the shot that you're really good at, that's totally fine too, because there are players who can only hit it one way. Thinking Brooks Koepka or Colin Morikawa or Bryson tend to hit a one-dimensional shot, but by the way, they've won more majors than almost anybody in the last number of years. So,
okay, we have another question, Terry, from Juliet Stack. Can you elaborate on someone who has hypermobility in their joints? These golfers seem to be the most challenging for me to help.
I think both ends of the spectrum are challenging on that regard. Phil's on the other end of the spectrum. As a Olympian, I'm sure he just enjoyed the Olympics. He has restricted motion, and it's a pretty binary thing, right? So there's a whole series of things that Mike talks about and that we can talk about here, is things that affect depth. So if you imagine just randomly my swing plane is whatever 45 degrees, if my body is hypermobile, my club is going to get further behind me from extra range of motion, extra X factor through transition, extra external rotation. Ricky Fowler on the downswing historically was a good example. And it's a huge right swing bias, right? And so, so somebody who's hypermobile, but I think actually Sergio is pretty hypermobile. So his dropping was hypermobile, but the way he released it eventually was more like an on-top golfer. So, he didn't swing significantly out to the right. He dropped it, but then it actually still came around the corner, which potentially needs a little bit of strength. So, hypermobile we'll usually see in juniors and female juniors. And, as people get older, I'm here at a country club, we'll tend to see people with less mobility. But basically, it's kind of a depth variable in that somebody who's more mobile, everything comes from a deeper place, tend to swing more to the right, tend to approach the ball more shallow. And, you can adjust your stance aim and, potentially sway gap. I haven't really thought about that, but I have been seeing, because sway gap is a shallower or a steepener, I have been seeing, quite a few people who are pretty long arm players starting with more sway gap than maybe I would have predicted. So, we use stance aim as a steepener or shallow, depending if you're stiff or flexible. And potentially you can play around with sway gap. The only problem with sway gap is you've got to be a little bit careful of how the arm, extends. For somebody who's more under or on top, they may need a little bit of a gap to give themselves the runway to, release at the right place at the right time. So let's move into some videos, Phil. I've got a few. Just thinking about how do I apply, sway gap as a lesson, for example. So I'm just going to throw some videos up here. Let me know if you don't see it.
And we might have time for one or two more questions at the end.
Yeah, I'll go
yeah,
as long as we need to. Let me
okay,
see where I did these videos are. That is not it. Okay, so I'm just going to play these kind of one after each other. These are drills basically designed to show sway gap lessons, for example. So, the first one would be more of an under golfer. The second one is more on top. Third one, at address. Third one will be how do I deal with increasing sway gap through transition. And then the fourth one is going to be how do I increase sway gap through the impact interval the right way. So here we go. It's going to take probably about 10 minutes. Let me know if we have any.
If you're a profile 789, which is an under golfer, it's really helpful to build a routine to give you the correct swing gap. So it really helps to start with the left hand. Something that Lee Trevino used to say. So here, try and make sure the handle is a tiny bit forward, high enough that it's kind of in line with the belly button. So slightly left of the belly button, but in line with it. From there, once you get the handle set, once you bring the trail hand in, it's going to be more under. So if my hands are more over here, I come in.
So this is just to show, increased sway gap. So using the monitor mode. So then someone who's on top might want to approach with the right hand.
To help you set the sway gap at address, come in with your right hand first. So we're going to make sure the right hand's slightly on top, a little bit softer trail arm because it needs to move. From there, once you set the trail hand, put the lead hand in, and you'll find that you're more stacked. So trail hand first, set it up, don't move it, put the lead hand in, go ahead and hit one.
So using monitor mode here, you can see that my sway gap is very stacked. This is actually probably a little bit too small. this is because I'm a relatively low ball hitter. This is kind of my style. What else we got? So a lot of people increase their swing gap through transition, especially better players. So this is sort of a good tip for them.
Struggle with their swing gap increasing through transition, which is pretty common in slightly better players. It's almost like they've learned to keep the club inside by driving the elbow into the hip. But that lack of force in the right hand, or the trail hand, means that the upper body also gets dragged back. So the kind of Ludwig drill, Mike drill, as we swing back, we want to feel like we're pushing the club away from the target, and that helps us to get our upper body more towards the target.
So here's the kind of the Mike or the Ludwig. I'm using a swim paddle here, which makes it a lot more consistent. You can see that my swing gap impact is a lot lower. So people that tend to hang back, this is a really good drill. You don't have to hit the ball. You can just have people, hit doing that. This one is a little bit more complicated. It's kind of interesting, hopefully.
Through impact is a very dynamic action. It's essentially we're pulling back on the club. So it's the old story of thinking that the hands are a boat and the head is a waterfall. The hands are taking a sharper curve on the way through than they did on the way back. So to do that, we need to be pushing into the ground and extending our spine in order that we pull on the club, and that with our sway gap means that as the club is heavy and pulling on us, we're pulling back on it. So the trick is we have to make the club heavy in the first place. So a drill that I do a lot, if somebody is moving forward too much or sagging too much, is actually just kind of stick the club in the ground like this. You want to feel like you're really pushing the club into the ground, sticking in the ground, digging the leading edge in, which is obviously very much the opposite of using the bounce. So once you achieve that a few times, make sure you can kind of stick it in the ground. So you're increasing the distance and the speed and the weight of the club. And then once you can do that, you've got something to pull back on. But if you're dragging and not pushing it out, then there's nothing to pull back on. So if you're pulling on it, it's kind of going to be pulling you forward. So I'm going to be feeling like I'm extending the club into my midline, and as it gets close to the ground, I want to feel like I actually extend my spine. So whilst I'm extending my spine on my left leg, that's going to cause some rotation, so it's not going to look like somebody standing up. It's going to hopefully look pretty good. So from here, pretty low sway gap for me, but if I go stick it in the ground, hit a high shot, then my sway gap should increase through the ball.
Very good for me because I tend not to have a ton, but that one actually looked a little bit better. So that's sort of the sway gap parts. That is, it's looking at the address, start with the left hand, right hand, top of the backswing, do the paddle drill, and through impact, release the club enough that you can pull back on it.
Good rear post drill is
talking about a low
back leg. So basically we're going to put the back leg here, take a little bit of weight off of the front leg. And you're practicing, applying force for a longer period of time on the right leg. So a lot of people, they think in rear, you've got to jump off of it. Not really, you actually got to sit in it for a little bit longer. So rear post is going to be sitting in the right leg until pretty late in the backswing. If you look at people like Min Woo Lee, Ludwig Aberg, it actually looks like they're kind of spinning out a tiny bit, but they're applying force into this right leg for a longer period of time. Hips are starting to open up. So a good way to feel that is just maybe do some practice swings. Sitting on the right leg, doing some practice swings. And again, I'm a big fan, when you start talking about ground forces, trying to do some swings and sort of get a sense of how you blend it into the swing, because all of these things happen so quickly. So this is a drill I learned from Mike, so go ahead and take that up. Why don't you do what you're told? Put your hands together like this. So where I put this has a big effect on the outcome of the ground reaction force. So for example here, I want you to turn through and hit me with the back of your left hand. Now, keep your hands together. Now, if you're just swinging your arms backwards and forwards, if we go further and hit it harder, in order to come up, you actually have to drop down. And so this is actually a really cool way to blend kind of the rotation and lift that is necessary. So go ahead and do that a few times, just tap me. And then sort of get a sense of how much down and up you're getting naturally. You're already adding. Just naturally, to try and get up here, you have to kind of drop down. Okay, now maybe there's an amount of down and up that suits you a little bit better. So let's go ahead and hit me hard as the first principle. Dropping is not the first principle. Hitting me is the first principle. Get out of the ground. If you can get out of the ground, then you can lower, through transition. But it's not just about dropping. I see a lot of people trying to drop and stay down. In my experience using 3D, so when we look at pelvis lift, if I tell someone to lift their pelvis through impact or wherever, they'll drop to do it. So it's like, this one is much more like reverse engineering. And for me, we have to do it in a way that really respects the complete golf swing, because when I see people pay attention to like single variables in the lower body, they forget to swing the club, and it really doesn't help in the way that it should.
Yeah.
When I'm working with a front post golfer, the biggest challenge is the time difference between when the lower body starts to move towards the target and when the head of the club finishes the backswing. So it's pretty easy to say to somebody, okay, go ahead and set up. We've got a force pedal here, so it sort of teaches you where to apply force. You can also put a shaft in between the legs. So you can say, hey, go ahead, Mark, and make sure the center of your pelvis gets left of that shaft nice and early, in order that you can push into the ground, whatever. Now the trick is, people misunderstand this, and they just sort of, when they go to the left side, they take everything with them, right? And so the transition time is interesting. So from somewhere around club parallel to the top of the backswing, whilst this golfer is moving to the lead side and sitting for a longer period of time on that leg, they still have to finish their turn, still have to finish the swing. So the drill I most like is, once you sort of get an idea of kind of what you're trying to do, is you have to blend it. So go ahead and do like 4 or 5 swings. And you want to have the sense that you're going to be applying some force into that force pedal early, but somewhere around club parallel, you've got to get a sense you're still finishing your turn and finishing your club swing. Yeah. So it's still turning, but at the top of the backswing, we're more on our left side, but we still have a backswing. So blending it into a swing is a much more effective way to sort of teach this one. This is a very important piece to understand. So you see Mark stopped at the top there, we don't really want that. So keep going, okay, good. So you want to feel that, yes, you're on your left side early, but you're going to turn and swing your arms. And if we're going to go into creating force, you're eventually going to push up at a slightly more vertical angle.
That's it.
All right, Terry, thank you. We have one more question again from Gabriel. He says, really looking forward to your book, but I'm dying to know your thoughts. Is it safe to reason that in your profile system, given a square stance and standard ball position, whatever they are, each profile type corresponds to one of the 9 shot shapes?
Not really. I would say it's kind of a diagonal that profile 1, 2, 3, absent of athleticism and like you said, same ball position, everything else the same. The on-top golfers are going to tend to hit more down on the ball, like Brooks Koepka, Sergio, and hit more of a cut. But there are many variables which are included. The previous question, somebody might be extremely flexible, and so the sort of down and left contribution of their profile may be offset by their flexibility, or like Rory, the explosiveness. 7, 8, 9 is going to tend to have a shallower attack angle and more of a draw bias shot shape, but that really is, during a lesson process, I'll get someone kind of near there, but there's so many very simple sort of low-hanging fruit pieces which enable you to customize their ball flight according to what they want. So, Bryson is an on-top golfer, hits draws. Colin Morikawa is an under golfer, hits fade. So it's not a limit, but as a general rule, which doesn't really help anybody, there is a tendency, and so we have to be very careful when we're fitting clubs or drivers and things like this, that we respect their style, and hopefully with the ping fitting chart, which is really good, which is fitting according to attack angle, then we can respect them a little bit further than we maybe did when we were trying to get everyone hit up on it.
Yeah, all right. Well, doesn't seem to be any more questions. So unless you've got any parting thoughts, we can finish it there.
Not really. I think the main thing that my mission and Mike's mission is to try to have people respect themselves first, and their students if they're coaches, and try to think deeply about cause and effect. Sportsbox has been a tremendous help to us in terms of organizing our thoughts, helping to put people into more precise buckets according to motion capture outcomes. Phil, you and I are going to come up with some more. You know, I'm very keen to hear from people who have been, you know, able to use maybe some of the assessments and what have you, and can contribute further in terms of things that they see. You know, at the end of the day, the whole golf instruction industry has got a lot of hours under its belt in terms of teaching. And, you know, the way we approach it is like, what is happening first? And I wonder why second, rather than, you know, fixing every unorthodox looking thing in front of us. So really it's just to say that the message we want to pass is that we really want to find, you know, an authentic sort of matched up stroke natural swing for each person. And that's what we're working on.
All right. Wonderful work, Terry, as usual. Thank you very much. And if you have any more questions, you can certainly email them to us, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thanks, Phil.
Bye.